Howdy y'all. I want to talk to you about avoiding fear. And if you're new here, my name's Kev and I'm here to help you transform your relationship with yourself. So this is hemlock. It grows everywhere in this coastal riparian zone of California, and I picked it not 12 feet away from where I'm standing. It literally grows everywhere, and the funny part is it's a very deadly poisonous plant. If I were to ingest this, I would die. Back in the more wild western days of California, people would put it in the wells of those they didn't like, and you could elucidate what would happen. So the silly thing is anyone who walks around here, maybe they know what hemlock is, maybe they don't. But most people aren't avoiding it. Most people aren't choosing to take a different path in life because hemlock's on the side of that path. Now, if we want to translate that into how we live our lives now, if hemlock represents, say, a fear, we're going to avoid that shit like the absolute plague. So if we have this beautiful, meandering path, and it's kind of, it's that long romantic path that leads, to these beautiful mountains, and then there's like the ocean, and the waves are really good, and the sun's just about setting over here. Most people, in the way that they relate to their fears, if your fears were hemlock and you knew about them, and this path was filled with hemlocks, despite that situation, not the sun, but despite that situation being the very situation you desire, we might completely avoid traversing this path. And there's a huge missed opportunity here because fear is simultaneously like the thing that scares the shit out of us, as it is such a profound and beautiful doorway. The problem is we have to learn to develop a sense of safety to be able to try to open that up so that we can see what's on the other side. The problem is most of us are so good at avoiding our fears that we don't even get to the place where we get close to the door. Now, I'm sure that you can translate this into your life in a multitude of different ways, but what I want to speak to is about embracing your fear. And no, it's not to say that you need to sit and chomp as if you're like a hungry dog. Hemlock, that's not embracing your fear. Embracing your fear isn't going and saying, I'm scared of dying, so I'm going to go eat this poisonous plant. Embracing your fear is saying, I acknowledge that this path scares the shit out of me. I also acknowledge that this path feels like it's the most authentic path to what I want. It's just a little frightening, but can I be okay with that? Can I allow myself the space and the freedom to sit with the fact it's like, okay, this is where I am. I'm at step 0. Step 0 is the conscious choice to engage and embrace fear. If I can even just get to step 1, where I'm sitting next to a hemlock or your proverbial fear for a moment, or knowing that you're making yourself available to experience fear, you're off in the right direction. The problem is I keep saying that phrase. I don't mean that these are all problems. It's just at each phase of this journey, we are going to be confronted with a deeper level of the same fear or a fear we didn't know exist. Fears are like, those really sketchy, Russian dolls that, and I'm not saying it's the fact that they're Russian that's sketchy or whatever, it's just they're stacked and stacked and stacked and stacked and stacked. This is sort of what fear is like. We might start off with man, I really fear taking action. Or I really fear, talking to that girl or whatever, if we're going to go in super, high school terms. Talking to the girl. Well, what that might reveal is fear of being uncomfortable. I'm not going to write them all out. Fear of being uncomfortable. Maybe the next one is fear of rejection. Ooh, getting a little juicier. Maybe the next one is fear of just the what if. underneath that, rejection. So what happens after the rejection? What if? How am I going to feel? You start looping into those stories. And then after the what if, it's like, fuck, man, am I good enough? Not good enough. I don't know why I'm trying to write it out. I just said. And then underneath that, you know, we can have this existential crisis of like, I don't even know who I am. Like, who am I? I fear, like, being me. You know, truly. And then underneath that, it's like, I can fear death or whatever it is. We can see that what starts off as something simple, like step 0 on this path of navigating the hemlock, we don't know what we're getting into, but we have to start with the willingness to be able to sit with and accept what arises. However you want to translate the metaphor, most of us kind of footstep, these are supposed to be footsteps, up to here and we stop. And then we turn on our intellectual brain. Let's see if I can draw a brain. Yeah, that could be a brain. Most people turn on their brain and we start trying to figure it out and think about it and think about it and think about it and what's the best way to navigate this path that has my fears. And it's like, well, the best way is actually learning that it's okay that your fears are present and just sitting with one at a time and not avoiding them. Because if you approach this path and you're like, I can't step off the path or I won't be okay. And so you try to figure it all out and then you tiptoe and tiptoe and tiptoe and tiptoe and tiptoe because you're trying to avoid the fears. Maybe by some stroke of God, you'll end up where you want to be. This is obviously going to be an illusion because it just, life doesn't work this way. There's no proverbial there equals illusion. There's no proverbial there. And did you actually learn anything if you spent this whole time tiptoeing and avoiding your fears, thinking that I navigated that more successfully and confidently because I successfully didn't feel my fears? I would argue that the most empowered person in the room is the one who has the full capacity to feel and embrace their fears. That's the most empowered person. And in terms of getting to this sort of fairy tale whatever, that person probably understands that they have that experience and energy on the inside already. Getting there is just a bonus round. But the person that has this capacity and steps up to the line doesn't even need to process or think about the fact that all these fears are there because it's baked into life. When you're in trust and you learn to stop avoiding fear, which is usually the very thing that you want, fear is always the doorway to the thing that you want, or the thing that you're being led to, the thing that is just kind of natural draw. When you let go avoiding that, you don't even notice the hemlock on the path. It might confront you at some point, or you might be, holy shit, there's hemlock everywhere. But you weren't in active avoidance, which is always a really slippery slope. You just were purely present. And that's how we really start to embrace our fear, is when we get out of the future and then we get out of the past. Because the fear is something that probably happened in the past that you don't want to repeat in the future, that is preventing you from really being purely present now, which is the best way that you could open up the doorway to get to where you want to go, which is nowhere. It's actually right here. But proverbially speaking, when we can cultivate a full capacity to feel our fears, one, even just identify them, but two, to accept that they're present, they're inside of me, that they're real, and that they're okay, that is being significantly empowered. So wherever fear presents itself, there's a doorway to that next level, that next iteration of yourself that you know you secretly yearn for, or maybe not so secretly yearn for. And the key is cultivating that safety. I forgot to mention, you really have to feel safe in your being, which means you have to die, funny enough, to, you know, things like ego and the idea of self. idea of self. Not that this is bad, it's just we have to find safety in allowing parts of ourselves to fade and to die in order to embrace our fears, because they're going to bring everything up. So yeah, if you want to walk this path, the most sustainable way to walk it is by not avoiding all of the obstacles on the way, but just by walking the path and being okay with what happens. It sounds so simple when we can be snide about that, but yeah, the Russian doll effect of fears, it's real. So yeah, let me know, and let me know what fears in particular you all struggle with, because I'd love to speak upon those. I tend to just go straight to the core, which is like, you fear death and not being good enough. But I know a lot of people need help on, maybe fears that are not as scary and deep, So yeah, thanks for watching. Appreciate you guys. Ciao.